Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason. I am the husband of Jothi, the father of Brielle, the father of Liam, and the father of River as well. Brielle is 7 years old. Liam is almost 5. River just turned 7 months, or is about to turn 7 months. So we are constantly exhausted and irritated all the time. We will be for the next several years. We've been living in New York for 9 years. My wife, Jyoti, who's here, she's a native New Yorker, but we've been there for 9 years, and we moved 9 years ago to plant a church. And it took us about, 2020? I don't know. The math it's not like it's a lot of numbers here. I don't know why it's taking me a while. I guess 7 years from the time we moved to the time we actually launched our first service. It took 7 years, and that's not the way that had envisioned it. We were living in Houston right before that. I was one of 2 pastors of a church in Houston, and it's good to be back here in Texas again. There's one thing that New York tries to do well, but it really doesn't compare. I mean, we love New York, but there's one thing that New York tries to do well and doesn't compare, and it's barbecue. Like, we miss Texas barbecue. There's actually a place in the Bronx called Dallas Barbecue. I don't know how that happened, but it's not the same. I don't know what they were thinking. Best barbecue I've ever had was in Austin, Texas. So when one person from Austin, horns down. I grew up in Oklahoma, so Austin, Texas has Franklin Barbecue is one of the highest rated barbecue joints in the country, maybe the world. And we were in Austin one weekend. We were told that it opens at 11, but you have to show up at 9 or before to get food. And even then, after waiting 2 hours in line, you're not guaranteed food. Because as you're standing in a line, they'll come around and ask, how much food do you want? And if the person in front of you says, I want 20 pounds of brisket, then you're all out of luck if that's all that was left. So my wife and I were there, and we thought, okay, we're finally going to be in Austin. We want to try this barbecue, this joint. We showed up before 9 o'clock, standing in line. And people have their side hustle. They're trying to give you like a lawn chair you can rent for 2 hours and all kinds of things. Standing in line, we tell them how much food we want. After 2 hours of waiting in line, we go inside, have to wait another 30 minutes inside. Finally get our brisket, sit down, as well as our sides. We sit there and we eat maybe for 15 minutes. And we look at each other. We say, that was totally worth it. Like, there are times in our lives where we will be told about the sacrifices that it's going to require, the challenges ahead, and we'll come to a conclusion that it's worth it. Now, sometimes it's silly as like, what kind of food do I want? Everything in Dallas is about 30 minutes away, right? So you try to make that decision when it comes to food. But other times it's more serious than that. There are decisions that you make that are really challenging that can affect the trajectory of your lives. Like, where am I going to live? What career path do I want to pursue? Do I want to start a family? Do I really want to have another kid in the middle of a pandemic, right? Those are all like questions that we had to ask too. At some point, you will find yourself at a crossroads. And you can visualize the sacrifice, the challenge, and the uncertainty ahead, and you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? The hope of this conference is that you would give your life for the advancement of the gospel, for the advancement of Jesus' kingdom, because you think and consider that it is worth it. It's worth all the sacrifice. It's worth all the suffering and uncertainty. Worship is the enjoyment of God and declaration of his worth. Anytime you enjoy God and you declare his worth, that's an act of worship. So it could be argued that seeing the Lord and beholding his glory and responding with your life and saying, I give you my life because you are worth it, is the ultimate act of worship. But I realize we're not all there. I realize that to think about where your life is, and maybe you think, maybe I'm already doing that. Maybe you might come to discover that you're not. Well, the context of today's passage that was read for us is that Isaiah, who is a prophet, is called to serve God, and he's given a very difficult task. God essentially tells him, no one's going to listen. No one's going to respond. Like when I thought about 9 years ago, when we were discerning the call to plant a church, I had one request, really. It was, don't let me fail. Like honor shame culture, God. Like I can't go out there, uproot my family, move to New York, and this thing not work out. We're going to be fundraising. We're going to be doing all of these things, casting vision. I was scared of failure. And I had to ask myself in the midst of that discernment process, is it worth it? Is shame, the fact that I might be ashamed at the end, the fact that this might not work out the way that I envisioned, the fact that there may be difficulty and uncertainty ahead, is it worth it? Isaiah was essentially told, no one's going to listen. No, you're not going to go viral, not at least at this time, at this point in your life. Tradition teaches that he was sawed in half. That's the way his life ended. There were going to be challenges, but at the end of the day, he considered it worth it. So to get us there, I would love for us to go through the same progression as Isaiah. He came to discover that the glory of God was worth it. He had to respond to God's glory and respond to God's grace. Let's look at those two things. First, respond to his glory. In the beginning of the chapter that was read for us, the King Uzziah had died. And in the aftermath of that, God called Isaiah, who would be a prophet, and he sees a vision of God in all of his splendor and beauty and majesty and holiness. He's one enthroned, highly exalted. And it alludes to the fact that this reign has no end. And it isn't in any way thwarted in the slightest by political rulers of the day. King Uzziah has died, but God still sits enthroned on high. And Isaiah beholds the glory of God. And I want you to notice what happens next. Let's read 1 through 5. I think it'll be on the screen. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings, they covered their faces. With 2, they covered their feet. And with 2, they were flying. And they were calling to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the threshold shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. So Isaiah has this vision of God's glory. And he hears the angels sing of his holiness. Holy, 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 holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of this doorpost, presumably where he's around, begin to shake at the sound of their voices. And this experience of God's glory forces Isaiah to respond. It forces him to look at his own life. It's instinctive. He immediately looks at his own life and he asks himself, how have I lived in light of this glory? How have I lived my life in light of a person like this? And he concludes instantly, I'm ruined. I'm a man of unclean lips and I live among a people who are also unclean. We're sinners. All the people that I know. The revelation of God's glory forces him to examine his own life, and forces him to ask himself, how have I responded to this glory my whole life? How have you? Have you ever had an experience like this, where the truth of someone else's greatness made you confront the truth about yourself? Let me give you a really silly example, all right? I started playing drums when I was 9 years old. And I played until I was 18, so that's about 9 years, right? And you know what? I thought I was pretty good until I heard someone who was really good. When I went to college, I went away to college in my freshman year. I dormed in that particular dorm. There are all kinds of musicians. You had cellists and people who play the violin and pianists and guitarists, and you had drummers as well. And so anytime you were in the dorm, you would hear people playing music. And one day when I was in my room, the door closed, I heard someone playing the drums. I was like, man, that's pretty good. And I opened the door and I peeked my head out of my room and I looked down the hall and I noticed that there is a crowd gathered around this guy's room. And I go over there and we're all just watching him play the drums. There's no other music. He's just playing drums. It was incredible. Like, I was amazed at the way that he was playing. So that when he finished and we're all standing there, I decided, I don't know, I was bold. I decided, I say, hey, how long have you been playing? He said, I don't know, man, maybe 5 years. 5 years. He said, what do you play? I play the guitar. Like, I didn't want anyone to say, hey, why don't you jump up there and try and play? Like, you know, I didn't want that sort of situation to play out, right? Seeing someone else really good made me reevaluate myself. Seeing the greatness of someone else made me instinctively think about where I was in relation to that person, and it actually made me confront the truth about myself. I wonder if Isaiah, seeing the glory of God, his holiness, his splendor and majesty, his beauty, made him look at his own life, and he realized he needed mercy. He needed grace. We may never have a vision of the same vision that Isaiah did, but God's glory surrounds us. In fact, you have something to a much lesser degree happen in Psalm 8, where the writer, he looks out at creation, he says, when I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have put in place, immediately, in light of seeing God's glory in creation, he draws a line to himself and he says, what is man that you are mindful of us? You care about us, that you even think about us. Beholding the glory of God, he traces a line back to himself and he thinks about who he is in relation to this God. But it's not all good news. In fact, Romans 1, this is the human condition. We see the glory of God that is all over creation, displayed and painted everywhere, but in our sinfulness suppress the knowledge of the truth. And you know what we do? We exchange the glory of the Creator God for created things. The glory of created things. So that we don't worship the Creator God, but we worship creatures, created things. And that's not always like, I worship animals. If you reorient your life around the approval of certain people, which is a created being, then that's a way of exchanging the glory of the Creator God for the glory of created things. Instead of worshiping him and reorienting our life around him, saying, Lord, you are worth it. Your glory is worth it. We reorient our lives around other lesser glories and say, you are worth it. We offer our lives to it. This is the way the late American author David Foster Wallace put it. This quote's from a book by James K. Smith called You Are What You Love. David Foster Wallace is not a Christian, and he ended up ultimately committing suicide. But this is what he concluded about the nature of worship and the fact that we all do it. He realized we all worship something, and he also recognized that the things that we worship never end up satisfying us. This is what he wrote. Or this is actually at Kenyon College as he addressed graduates there. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Worship power. You will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart. You will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. The insidious thing about these forms of worship is that they are unconscious. They are default settings. They're the kind of worship you just gradually slip into day after day without ever being fully aware that that's what you're doing. In other words, you can't help it. You're going to behold the glory of something, and it's going to be so compelling to you that you're going to make a decision to reorient your life around it as a way of declaring its worth and hoping that it will satisfy you, but it never does. So I want you to ask yourself, what is that? What is that glory that you've been seeking, that you've been reorienting your life around? Is it the glory of the Creator God, or is it the glory of created things? Is it the glory of wealth and status and security and comfort and fame and beauty? And has it demanded your life? Have you given it your life and discovered that at the end of it, you just feel ugly and stupid and never enough? and not good enough, that it's never enough? Or have you responded to his glory, his goodness, his beauty, his compassion towards you, his unfailing love, your creator and mine? You see, if this question makes you realize that you need mercy, if thinking about the glory of God causes you to instinctively reevaluate your life and how you've lived in light of it, and if you draw the conclusion that Isaiah did, that you need mercy, you're in good company. Because the good news is not only did he end up responding to God's glory, he also responded to God's grace. So let's look at that right now. If we're going to give our lives for God's purpose, we must respond to his glory, but respond to his grace as well. Let's read 6 through 13. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." He said, "Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." Then I said, "For how long, Lord?" And he answered, "Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as a terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land." Yes, there's so much there. I don't know how many of you, after saying, "Here I am, send me," would respond to that calling and say, "Okay, I'll still go." I want you to notice, though, what happened. Why was it worth it for him? Not only does this become a moment for him to confront the truth about himself, but it also becomes an opportunity for him to confront the truth about God's grace. As soon as he realized that he was a sinful man and lost, that he was ruined, and he stood behold this beautiful and holy God, this king made a way for him to experience forgiveness and salvation. And that became enough. I want you to understand, especially in today's day, how radically different that is than what people experience in their hope of redemption. Like, if you think about celebrities as an example, like when someone fails in the public light, there is usually a playbook. There's a couple of years ago, someone for the New York Times wrote an article on how they have publicists specifically focused on apology tours, right? Like how someone will apologize and then be asked back into the public light again. And you know what it's like. Like, sometimes it just sounds very insincere. For example, first they'll put out a statement, and this is legit. They'll put it on a notes app to show their humility. Like it's somehow more authentic, right? So they put out a public apology on the notes app, and then they'll retreat, and at the same time promise to take this time of retreat to learn, to be better, to be a better human being. And then they'll come back and do some philanthropy, some acts of service, and finally have an interview with Oprah, if you're lucky. Like, it ends with Oprah. When she absolves you, or if you're roasted by Jeff Ross on Comedy Central, it's one of those two things. You're invited back into the public light. Like, there is no other way of redemption. But what you see here is before he could say, "Forgive me," before he could say, "I'm sorry," the king already made a way of provision for him to experience forgiveness and salvation. And it's only God's grace in Jesus Christ that will lead us to do that. I want you to think about it. Moments before, what did he say in light of God's glory? He said, "I'm ruined." But immediately after that, he says, "I'm here." And it's only God's grace in Jesus Christ that can get us to go from "I'm ruined" to "I'm here, God." Like, I am hopeless and I live among a people who are hopeless. We are sinners, to saying, "God, I will go wherever you want me to go. I will go, God. Wherever you send me, whatever the challenge is, no matter how difficult, I'm ruined. No, I'm here." Now, this is going to be tough, Isaiah. I'm here. No, no one's going to listen to you. This is not going to go viral. They're not going to remember you. Tradition's even going to teach that your life, your body was sewn in half. I'm here. What would lead a person to go from I am ruined to I'm here, but the grace of God revealed in Jesus Christ? Whenever we say it's worth it, throughout this weekend, if there ever comes a moment when you think about how rigorous the journey is or how arduous the task, if you arrive at a point where you say it is worth it, it will always be in response to the glory of God and the grace of God revealed in Jesus Christ. It can't be results. I got to tell you, after everything that we tried to do, the fasting and prayers and grieving and all of that, after all that process, launching right before a pandemic, if results were driving us, like if numbers and the hope of being viral, and I got to tell you, there were times where I was tempted, where that was an idol I had to continually to sacrifice, because it's in me. Like I want to be successful in the eyes of people. But if that was what was going to lead us, then we were going to continue to experience despair after despair after despair. It actually could plunge us into depression. But when it's the glory of God and the grace of God that becomes your motivator, God, because of who you are, because you've loved a sinner like me, what else would I do with my life? It's a response to his glory and his grace. Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which won a Pulitzer specifically for logotherapy, something that he developed. But he was asked what it was that actually got him through one of the most horrific forms of suffering, the Holocaust. And I'm just going to paraphrase something that he concluded in his book. He said, "You can endure any circumstance, no matter how dire, if you can set your heart and mind upon that which you love, which has infinite value to you." You can endure anything as long as you fix your eyes on that which you love, which has infinite value for you. And for Viktor Frankl, that was his wife. He thought about his wife frequently. But I don't know, I feel like maybe some of you can resonate with this. I tend to think that if you place anything else there but God, if you live long enough, you'll begin to see that glory fades. Even relationships. Some of you can say right now that your relationships may be the source of your greatest strength and some of the best seasons of your life. And rightfully so. We're made for relationships, right? God has never had an experience apart from relationships. He has eternally existed as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He's always lived in relationship. And when we are designed for relationships, and that's a good thing. So it can get us through some of the worst seasons of our life. But if you live long enough, you realize that relationships may also be the source of the worst seasons of your life. Your work and career, we're made to work, right? It's something that was pre-fall. He told us to go and have dominion and cultivate the earth. That's something that took place before the fall. We're made to work. And it can even provide a great distraction in times of difficulty. But I'm sure you also know you live long enough and you realize that your work can be the greatest source of stress and instability in your life. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if we're going to gaze upon the infinite glory of something, unless it's the glory of God revealed in the gracious face of Jesus Christ, it will ultimately fade. And what keeps us going for the advancement of the gospel, when the glory of everything else fades and you may not get results and it may not be what you thought, what gets us to continue to persevere in the midst of suffering is the beauty of Jesus' face. We see his glory revealed in the face of Christ, and we say again and again and again, I'm here. I don't know if Isaiah would have ever have understood what he was writing, but there was another revelation that he had of this king. But it was drastically different than what you see in Isaiah 6. The same person who wrote of this holy God before whom angels covered their faces wrote this also about this king who grew up like a young plant, a root out of dry ground, having no beauty or majesty that anyone would desire him. Despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, bearing our grief, who would bear our sorrows and be pierced for our transgressions. He may not have realized it then, but then as a sinner that when he was a sinner who could not go near a holy God and live, one of these days that holy God, that holy King would draw near sinners and die. And it's in light of this mercy that we offer our bodies as living sacrifices to him, which is our true and proper worship. We, those who were once ruined, by his grace say, I'm here. It's the only way to respond to his glory and grace. I'm going to now invite Dane to come forward and lead us in a time of prayer and reflection. But I'd love to pray for us now as well. Dear Lord, we pray that you would help us by the power of your Spirit to see the glories that have enamored us, that have drawn us, and maybe even demanded our lives. Lord, by your grace, in the face of Jesus Christ, help us to behold your glory.